The gravel crunches under my tires as I pull into the east parking lot of the Mount Falcon Trail System. The clock on my dashboard advances to 10 a.m. It's a Wednesday, a work day. But work is, for once, the last thing on my mind. My friend Scott is already there with his wife Gabby, lacing up their hiking boots and using the frame of their car to stretch a bit before we hit the trail. The night before, Scott and I had tossed around the idea of rucking, throwing some weight into a pack and seeing how the trail feels when your body is carrying a little more than usual. Scott, always prepared, shows up with an extra pack. 35 pounds. He grins as he hands it over to me like he's passing over a gift. As I slip it on, he squints at me and asks, "Wait, is this your second workout today?" I laugh. Yeah, I hit the gym this morning. Luckily, it was mostly arms and chest, so the legs are fresh. Let's go. We all chuckle and then we're off. 5 miles later, my shoulders ache from the straps and my calves are humming from the climb. I'm certain that my feet, always in barefoot zero shoes, will be sore the next day. Not from the impact, but because I use the muscles in the soles of my feet with more vigor than I usually do. But all of it is a blissful discomfort, a delightful soreness that makes me feel alive. And my soul, it is strangely light. This isn't work, this is something else. And it doesn't stop there. That night, there's another hike planned. This time sponsored by my gym, Gravity House, an outdoor adventure collective. We'll walk together, ruck-free, laughing and trading stories on what I've deemed as some active recovery. Afterwards, we'll head to a local microbrewery and share more stories over beer and Thai food. Between the two hikes, I took a nap. Just because I could. My body dropped into a deep sleep where dreams I forget the moment I wake up traverse my brain with the same vigor I'd moved in my morning workouts. All in all, it's a day filled with laughter, sweat, and community. And suddenly, this random Wednesday, a day that would usually be swallowed up by email and productivity, feels like Sabbath. Sabbath. It's a word heavy with tradition. For many of us, Sabbath is either about prohibition or obligation. On the Jewish side, Sabbath has often been framed as what you cannot do. Don't carry, don't cook, don't strike a match or drive the car or flick the light switch. A list of restrictions designed to protect the sacredness of the day. On the Christian side, especially in the West, Sabbath got collapsed into Sunday worship. You go to church, you sit in a pew, maybe you avoid mowing the lawn if you grew up in a stricter household. But both approaches, while connected to a beautiful devotion in their own context, often ends up feeling either constricting or hollow, and in the process turns something that should be restorative into just a different form of work. I was reminded of this when I think back to my friend Curtly. We met while I was doing my doctoral work at Portland Seminary. Curtly was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, and if you know anything about Adventists, you know that Sabbath is central. Sundown Friday to sundown Saturday is carefully set aside. No work, no commerce, no distractions. And to add to that, there are the Adventist dietary restrictions. No pork, no shellfish, often a vegetarian lifestyle, and absolutely no alcohol. What you begin to see how the entire rhythm of life gets shaped by rules of what you can and cannot do. But here's what struck me. Over time, Curtly came to realize that what he had thought of as faithfulness was really just more work. Sabbath wasn't rest, it was labor. All of those rules, all of that restriction had become another way of trying to earn God's approval rather than simply receiving divine grace. One night, after one of our doctoral intensives, I took Curtly to a bar. He decided, for the first time in his life, to order a beer. And then he did something even bigger. He ordered ribs, pork ribs. When the plate arrived, he picked one up, took a bite, and his whole face lit up. His body almost vibrated with delight. He was so excited, he pulled out his phone, called his wife, and told her, "I'm eating pork ribs, and they are amazing." In that moment, Sabbath broke open for him. It wasn't about proving himself to God by what he denied. It was about receiving the good gifts of God with gratitude and joy. So what if we remixed Sabbath, making it not about less, but about more? Not about restriction, but invitation. Not about empty ritual, but full humanity. The word Shabbat literally means to cease. But notice what God ceases from in Genesis. God brings to a close his creative act of naming and giving purpose to everything in creation. The heavens above, the earth below, the depths of the sea and the bountiful land, and of course, the living creatures that animate all of it. Then God stops, not because God is tired, but to delight, to savor, to call creation good. The Creator rests not out of exhaustion, but out of joy. Later, in Exodus, Sabbath becomes a liberation story. The former slaves who'd spent centuries working 7 days a week, 365 days a year, are told, "You will stop. You will not grind 7 days a week. You will not make bricks without straw forever. You will have a rhythm of resistance." Sabbath says you are not a machine built to produce. Sabbath says you are not a consumer built to spend. Sabbath says you are beloved, whole, worthy of delight. The psalmist echoes this in Psalm 23. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. This isn't just rest, it's recreation, soul restoration. This isn't unique to the Abrahamic traditions either. Across the world, wisdom traditions have understood the necessity of sacred pause. In Buddhism, the practice of mindfulness offers a kind of ongoing Sabbath. Rather than setting aside a specific day, Buddhism invites practitioners into present moment awareness throughout their lives. The Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh teaches what is called mindful consumption, being fully present with what we eat, how we read, what we watch, and how we spend our time. He writes, "When we can slow down and really enjoy our food, our life, and our health, we can see the true face of the world." This mindfulness extends to movement practices like walking meditation, where each step becomes a kind of prayer, a Sabbath rhythm that reminds us that we are more than our productivity. Indigenous traditions often build rest and recreation directly into their cultural rhythms. Many Native American communities incorporate ceremonial cycles that honor changing seasons with periods of both activity and rest built into their calendar. The Pueblo peoples of the Southwest, for example, observe days of silence and prayer following major ceremonies, allowing the community to integrate spiritual experiences. The Taoist concept of wu wei, often translated as non-doing or effortless action, echoes Sabbath wisdom. It's not about doing nothing, it's about acting in harmony with the natural flow of life rather than forcing or striving. The Taoist sage understands that sometimes the most powerful action is non-action, allowing space for natural processes to unfold. Even secular philosophers have recognized this need. Philosopher Joseph Piper, in his book Leisure, The Basis of Culture, argues that true leisure isn't idleness, but a receptive attitude of celebration and wonder. He writes that leisure is an attitude of contemplative celebration that stands in stark contrast to the world of work, dominated by effort and achievement. The wisdom of Sabbath even echoes through the spiritual but not religious. Poet Mary Oliver whispers a Sabbath truth in her poem The Summer Day, where she describes spending hours observing a grasshopper wandering through fields and kneeling in grass. The poem celebrates the kind of attentiveness that Sabbath invites, a day devoted not to productivity but to presence. In the poem, Oliver moves from careful observation of nature to profound questions about existence itself. She asks, who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? These are not just scientific inquiries, but spiritual ones, the kind of wondering that emerges when we step out of urgency and into eternity. Oliver's poem culminates in perhaps the most beautiful Sabbath question of all. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Sabbath is the practice of answering that question, not with productivity or perfection, but with play, presence, and delight. I want to linger here for a moment on what happens in our bodies, minds, and spirits when we dare to embrace this reimagined Sabbath. Not as religious performance, but as life-restoring practice. Our bodies know things our productivity-obsessed culture wants us to forget. They remember what it means to be fully human. When we step off the hamster wheel of constant production and consumption, our nervous systems begin to tell a different story. The parasympathetic nervous system, that sacred part of us designed for rest and restoration, finally gets to speak. The science here isn't cold. It's a love letter to our forgotten humanity. When we practice true Sabbath, stress hormones like cortisol begin to recede like an outgoing tide. Blood pressure softens, breath deepens, our immune system so often compromised by the relentless pace of modern life remember their strength. This isn't luxury. This is survival. Our brains, these miraculous organs we've reduced to productivity machines, have a secret life that blossoms in the spaces between doing. Neuroscientists call it a default mode network, brain regions that lighten up when we were focusing on external tasks. In our culture's twisted logic, this mental space feels like a wasteland. But it's actually fertile ground where memories consolidate into wisdom. Creativity sparks unexpected connections. Solutions to problems emerge unbidden. And our sense of self and meaning has room to breathe. The great irony, our most brilliant insights rarely come when we're grinding. They arrive in the shower, on a walk, or staring at the ceiling during a nap. Sabbath isn't unproductive, it's differently productive in ways that capitalism cannot measure or monetize. Those beers and that laughter after the hike weren't just pleasant extras, they were medicine. When we gather without agenda, not networking, not producing, just being, our bodies release oxytocin, that beautiful bonding hormone that whispers, "You belong here." Study after study confirms what indigenous cultures have always known. Humans need community, not just for practical survival, but for soul survival. Meaningful connection reduces everything from heart disease to depression to mortality itself. Yet how many of us have replaced true connection with the hollow substitute of social media likes? Sabbath calls us back to tables and trails, to conversations without screens, to the holy ground of being truly seen. Beyond the measurable benefits lies something science struggles to quantify, but wisdom traditions have always honored: the awakening of awe. Whether standing beneath mountain peaks or sitting in sacred silence, these moments of transcendence connect us to something larger than ourselves. The research names this self-transcendence, but the experience feels more like remembering who we really are. These encounters with wonder aren't spiritual luxuries. They're ecological necessities that reshape how we relate to each other and to Earth itself. People who experience awe regularly show greater compassion, less entitlement, and more care for the natural world. In a time of climate crisis and social fracture, couldn't we use more of that? The truth is, our physical selves aren't machines to be optimized, but gardens to be tended. When I let my body move on that trail, carrying weight and finding rhythm, I wasn't just exercising, I was remembering what it means to be an embodied creature. The strain in my shoulders, the steady pace of footsteps, the breath moving in and out. This wasn't punishment, but communion with the body's ancient knowledge. And later, the sweetness of that nap wasn't laziness, but necessary integration, the body's way of weaving exertion into strength. In a culture that alternates between worshiping and punishing the body, Sabbath offers a third way: honoring the body as worthy of care simply because it exists and not because of what it produces or how it appears. Nature itself practices Sabbath. Trees don't produce leaves year-round, they shed them to conserve energy. Fields must lie fallow to regain fertility. Rivers pause in still pools before continuing their journey. Even the earth keeps seasons of dormancy before renewal. What we call burnout, nature recognizes as extinction. When we push ecosystems beyond their capacity for regeneration, they collapse. The same happens to our bodies, communities, and spirits when we deny them necessary Sabbath. Perhaps the deepest ecological wisdom is this: nothing in nature produces constantly. Creation itself began with divine rest on the seventh day, not as an afterthought, but as a culmination. What if we understood Sabbath not as withdrawal from productivity, but as a participation in the sacred rhythm that sustains all life? And at its core, Sabbath practice is radical love embodied. It's loving ourselves enough to honor our limitations. It's loving our communities enough to be present rather than productive. It's loving future generations enough to model sustainable existence. When we practice Sabbath, we're making a declaration: I am worthy of love and care simply because I exist, not because of what I produce. And if that's true for me, it must be true for every other being. Our capacity to love expands when we're not depleted. The compassion we cultivate in rest becomes the foundation for justice work that sustains rather than exhausts. Sabbath doesn't just prepare us to love better. It is love in action. Love for our bodies, our communities, our planet, and the sacred rhythm that holds us all. In other words, embracing Sabbath is holy ground. But here's the rub. Our culture doesn't want you to Sabbath. Capitalism runs on endless consumption. If you're not producing, you should be consuming, because overproduction demands overconsumption to make sure that the system keeps growing. Work harder, buy more, scroll longer, binge faster. Even our leisure gets monetized. Concert tickets, vacations, streaming subscriptions, all wrapped in the logic of consumption. We talk about wanting experiences over things, but then we turn our experiences into things, as the social media posts and the relics prove we were there. But our souls show no sign of transformation from what we encountered on the journey. Even when we rest, we often don't recreate. We numb, we medicate, we escape, we collapse. But Sabbath is not collapse. Sabbath is creation renewed. Let me share a story that captures this Sabbath wisdom perfectly. A capitalist was walking along the beach when he spotted a fisherman lounging by his small boat, enjoying the sunshine. "Why aren't you out fishing?" the capitalist asked. "I've already caught enough fish for today," the fisherman replied. "But why don't you catch more?" "And what would I do with more fish?" "Well, you could sell the extra fish and make more money. Then you could buy a bigger boat to catch even more fish." "And why would I do that?" "So you could hire people to fish for you and expand your operation. Eventually, you'd have a fleet of fishing boats and a processing plant. You'd be rich." "And then what would I do?" the fisherman asked. "Then you could retire, move to a small coastal village, sleep late, fish a little, play with your children, take siestas with your wife, and spend evenings drinking wine and playing guitar with your friends after an afternoon of relaxing on the beach." To all of this, the fisherman smiled and replied, "What do you think I'm doing now?" So what happens in a world that doesn't want you to Sabbath? The answer differs dramatically depending on where you stand. For those with some level of economic stability, the obstacle isn't actual lack, but manufactured fear. The system convinces us there isn't enough, or if that we pause our productivity, what we have will vanish. The artificial scarcity becomes the stick that drives us forward when the carrots of consumption no longer satisfy. We don't keep working because we need more. We keep working because we're afraid of having less. Less than we have now, less than our neighbors, less than we believe we deserve. Those invisible yet powerful forces keep us chained to our desks, afraid to claim the rest our bodies need. The voices whisper, "If you stop, you'll fall behind. If you rest, someone else will take your place. If you aren't producing, what value do you have?" But for others, the barrier to Sabbath isn't psychological, it's painfully real. While some battle artificial scarcity, many genuinely struggle with true deprivation. Families forced to choose between medicine, food, or keeping the lights on. Workers putting in full-time hours yet unable to afford rent. Parents skipping meals so their children can eat. It's the cruel paradox of our age. While we produce more than ever before in human history, this abundance isn't equally distributed. More than enough food exists globally, yet people starve. More than enough houses stand empty, yet homelessness rises. More than enough wealth has been generated, yet economic insecurity spreads. For both groups, though in profoundly different ways, We sacrifice Sabbath at the altar of security that never arrives. We trade present for a future that keeps receding. We push our bodies beyond their limits, not for abundance, but from fear or necessity. And that's when we burn out, break down. Our bodies give us what our minds refuse to concede. The truth is brutal but liberating. In a system designed to keep us forever insecure, be that insecurity real or imagined, no amount of productivity will ever feel like enough. The only way out is to step off the hamster wheel entirely, to recognize the lie and refuse it. But this truth comes with an uncomfortable recognition. For those trapped in actual scarcity, stepping off isn't a choice they can freely make, which is why we need Sabbath solidarity. Truth be told, my ability to take a random Wednesday and string together gym time, a 5-mile ruck, a nap, and a brewery hike with friends is not something accessible to everyone. It's a privilege. Possible because I'm self-employed, which is made possible right now because I live in my parents' old house, which dramatically lowers my monthly expenses. That means my schedule flexes in ways that many people's do not. And I recognize that. And I approach this with deep humility. My ability to practice Sabbath is a gift that many cannot access due to economic necessity, caregiving responsibilities, or systemic injustice. And while there could be an impulse to feel guilt because of the privilege, it is far better for everyone if I approach it with a sense of responsibility. For those of us with Sabbath privilege, our response must be twofold. First, fully embrace our own rest, while second, actively working to expand that possibility for others. Practice Sabbath without apology. When privileged people reject out of misplaced solidarity, nobody benefits. Your Sabbath practice physically embodies the world as it should be for everyone. So what if the most radical thing we could do in a world bent on extraction isn't to work harder for justice in the moment, but to embody the world we're fighting for? What if rest isn't retreat, but resistance? What if joy isn't frivolous, but foundational? What if Sabbath isn't selfish, but revolutionary? Our bodies know the truth. They've been telling us all along in the language of exhaustion and illness, anxiety and disconnection. Now it's time to listen, not just for our own sake, but for the healing of our common home. So receive this gift gratefully while acknowledging its unequal distribution. Then leverage your privilege with intention. Use your rested body and mind to advocate for living wages and humane working conditions. Create Sabbath spaces that welcome others who might not otherwise access rest. Support mutual aid networks that ease burdens for overworked communities. Vote for policies that expand workers' rights and economic justice. Share resources that make rest more accessible to others. This isn't about saviorism, but solidarity. Our individual Sabbath practices exist within social systems that determine who gets to rest and who doesn't. The goal isn't to feel guilty, but to create conditions where Sabbath becomes possible for more people. That means Sabbath is never just personal, it's profoundly political. So let's show the world what it's like to reclaim our humanity in a world that wants to strip it away, and then fight to make that reclamation possible for everyone, however they choose to Sabbath. Be it rucking through the woods with friends, enjoying a beer and laughter after a hike, taking a nap in the middle of the day with no apology, enjoying art, music, sex, play, joy, connection. Whatever form it takes, Sabbath is spirit whispering, this is what you were made for. It's about filling your soul. Sabbath is about staying human.